Nitinji, we can start.
One minute, 1 minute. 6:35. We are starting in 1 minute.
Okay, we can, I think, start in 2-3 minutes. Yes.
Two minutes. We were starting. 6:35. We will start.
Okay.
See that nobody can make disturbance. Okay, Mr. Chandan.
Yeah.
When everybody is muted and even no video also. Okay, except you, nobody is, because sometimes people are making disturbance. That's the only thing I'm much worried about it.
Okay.
It's just being recorded and being live on. उस पे भी है, Zoom पे, सब जगह पे, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn.
Okay.
So, friends, एक minute, let me start recording also, because I generally record and keep it in our YouTube also. So from here, the recording will start. Good evening, friends. If you look at the way the world is changing very fast, okay, and if you look at the way cricket has changed, 378 run is changed yesterday with so much ease and comfort, and with all odds against England, but they won with so much ease and comfort. So the way India is growing, nobody else can compete India. That is what I feel about it. But only thing is missing is the leadership. The system, we are not supposed, we are used to not to follow the system. But and the way the Chinese people are working very hard, we are still missing that. But in spite of all odds, India is shining. And we as an Indian, we as a chapter in Ahmedabad, we had started 2.5 years back. We are regularly taking seminar every week, possibly on different subject, with some subject where we give CPA. Those who want CPE, please email me at nitinampatak@gmail.com. Please email me at nitinampatak@gmail.com with Isaka membership number, email ID, and I'll see that you get a CPE over store. Okay. And last but not least, Isaka chapter has grown by pillar to pillar. When we joined, we are only 35 members. Today, we were more than 120 members. We had been growing at the pace of second highest in the world since last 2 years. Mr. Chandan Chaurasia is my friend, and he immediately accepted the invitation. I'd done CISA long back. I'd been in traditional practice, so I don't know anything about the information technology, but I had read a lot. I make an audit program on this subject. But today we have an expert who is CA and CISA, more than 20 years experience in the field of assurance and this thing, audit. He is a partner in SR Chaurasia and Company, is a PCOAB registered firm, and director in Voice Consulting India Private Limited. His professional experience include IT and internal audit of manufacturing R&D sector, IT, BPO, telecom. He has provided a number of lectures. Once many person I called him, they said he's a champion of the person. That's many of my friends have told me. He's from Pune. He is a past president of ISACA. One of the chairman told me, "Is he going to person in to you in Ahmedabad?" No, I said nothing to him, but I just sent him a smiley. With this brief introduction, I hand over the mic to him. Any question? We would reopen all. We will unmute all. In the meantime, you have a question, you just mail me or this thing. With this, I hand over the mic to Mr. Chaurasia. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Hand over to you, sir.
Thank you for a short introduction, and it was a good introduction, and I'm really happy to have the lecture meeting with Ahmedabad chapter. So basically, I thank Nitin ji for providing me the opportunity for the presentation. So basically, the topic we are covering is service organizational controls. There are two SOC which go on in which we frequently hear in the industry. One is the service organizational controls, and second is your security operations center. So, but we are focused on the service organization controls and not on the security operations centers, which is the SOC, which is used for monitoring of system events and incidents management. So basically, we are covering the SOC 1 and 2, which is a part of SSA 18, which is issued by the AICPA, that is American Institute of Certified Accountants, and this is a standard which has a history. So I'll first jump on the history of the SOC. Now, SOC was basically it was originally in the form of SAS 70. It was first introduced in 1992. The reason why SOC was introduced because there were a lot of services which were outsourced by an organization to another company or outside the organization, like your payroll processing, AP processing, accounts payable processing, accounts outsourcing. Total accounts outsourcing was also done under SAS 70. By the organizations. Now, when you're outsourcing certain services to another company or outside your organization, you need to ensure that how will you get an assurance that the controls which are implemented in your outsourced service entity, that is the service organization, are working correctly or no. So for that, SAS 70 was introduced. SAS 70 gained more prominence in around 2002-2003 after advent of SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Because in Sarbanes-Oxley Act, there were controls which were required for internal controls over financial reporting. So when auditors wanted to know, wanted an assurance as to these controls are working correctly or no, then the auditors used to request for SAS 70. That's when some of the organizations in India started having getting the SAS 70 reports, and these SAS 70 reports had controls related to what are the IT general controls implemented by the organization, so that the data processing is correctly done, integrity is maintained, and the reliability of data is also high. And the security controls are also working correctly. So that was the basic purpose of SAS 70. SAS 70 then got revised in 2010 to bring it in line with the international ISA 3402 report. Now the International Audit Accounting Association, they also wanted to align with US also wanted to align their structure with ISA 3402. So that's when the SAS 7, the SSA 16 was introduced, and the SAS 70, which was earlier related to only internal controls over financial reporting, SOC 1, was put in as a SOC 1, and then it was introduced, and then second was introduced was a SOC 2. Now there are a lot of outsourced services being or development related activities or certain applications which are used, which require assurance that the controls are working correctly. That's when the SOC 2 also came into picture. And since 2011, a lot of organizations had to start doing SOC 2 audit for the outsourced business, or some of the services they are utilizing, or some softwares they are utilizing from other organizations. Now, SAS 16 was SSAE 16 was again revised in 2017, and it became SSAE 18. And these there was a revision, major revision, in which there was monitoring, or it was introduced that the monitoring of subservice organization controls was also introduced. So this was a major change, wherein earlier only organizational controls had to be reported, but now if you are using another subservice organization, then SAS 70, SSA 18 required that the monitoring of subservice organizational controls should be carved in or carved out, or such things were also introduced in SOC 2. Now, why was SOC required? First thing, it was earlier in SAS 70, reports were required by auditors for, especially for SOC's purpose, for financial process outsourced by user entity. Now, financial processes like, say, your payroll systems, your AP accounts payable is outsourced, accounts receivable is outsourced. Sometimes the general ledger accounting was outsourced, billing is outsourced, or your vendor management, or processing of invoices. All these were, if these were activities were outsourced, then a special IC report was required under SOC, under SAS 70. This also provided assurance that the work or controls in the service organizations were correctly functioning. When subsequently SAS 70 was aligned to 3402, there was this concept of trust service criteria which was introduced. Now, there were 5 trust service criteria under which the reporting was required. One was related to security, second, availability, third was confidentiality, fourth was processing integrity, and next one was the privacy. I think a lot of people are aware of the ISO 27001. So similarly, SOC 2 is also on the same lines, on similar lines, but has certain differences with ISO 27001. Especially the American clients or the US based entities were started requesting for SOC 2, and the reporting had to be done on these 5 trust service criteria. Now, what are the key things which we need to understand under SOC? First is, what is a service organization? That is, this is the organization which provides the service, products, or providing any outsourcing services, or hosting any data center. These are called the service organization. So the organization that you are auditing right now is the service organization. Then there is a user entity. User entity is the one who is using the services of the service organization. So these are the terms which can be a bit confusing, or which will come frequently, but we need to, that's why I first understand what are these terminologies for. Next is the user entity, as I mentioned, is the user of your services, of the service organization services. Then there is a sub-service organization. Now, what is a sub-service organizations? You don't perform all the services by yourself. You might outsource certain services, or you might utilize certain other services. Like the primary one is the cloud service. Now, if you are having a software product and it is hosted on AWS, then AWS becomes your sub-service organization. That is the entity of which you are using for which you are using the platform. So that becomes a service organization for you. This concept is important because a lot of services, or a lot of your security related services, your service management might be outsourced. So these things are sub-service organizations for you. Then there are complementary user entity controls. Now, what are complementary user entity controls? Are the user organization or your client is performing certain activities at his end, like his user management, or preventing any like maintaining the VPN, or providing access to your employees in their environment. These are his responsibilities. So these also need to be functioning correctly, and these need to be mentioned in the report, so that you have a clarity as to what is the user entity related controls which are in place. So these are, as I mentioned, these are the various type of SOC. SOC 1 is applicable when there are controls related to financial reporting. So SOC 1 is applicable in that case. There is no specific format for IT for SOC 1. You need to go through what are the systems which are being followed, what are the controls which are being exercised, or what are the processes, or what are the key IT processes like change management, backup, access controls. You need to map in those and then report on SOC 1. In case of SOC 2, there are 5 trust service criteria which are applicable, and there's a specific reporting format which will report on security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. We will go through some of these criteria and in the next slide. Third is the SOC 3 report, which is a general report for public utility. Normally, you won't find SOC 3 reports prevalent. Most of the time, it is the SOC 2. 90% of the time, it is the SOC 2 report which is requested by the clients. Sometimes only you will get a report, you will require to report on SOC 1 in case of controls. Now, examples of SOC applicability in case of SOC 1. There is a requirement when financial processes like AP, AR, payroll, etc. are being outsourced. Then medical claim processors. If you are processing medical claims and you're entering this data in the client systems, then SOC 1 report is also applicable. Certain fintech companies who are processing your payment data, or they are you're using their payment systems, then the SOC 1 is applicable in that case. Data centers also need to comply with SOC 1. Sometimes there are a lot of requests because your financial applications or your key applications might be hosted on a data center. So data centers like Airtel or Tata Communications have to comply with SOC 1 requirement. And there are SaaS applications that may have impact on your financials of user entities. Those are also required to comply with the SOC 1 requirement. Majorly the SOC 2 report, which is most prevalent in the market, is normally requested for SaaS hosted products. We have done a lot of audits on SOC 2, so we have seen SaaS products which are into say mobile device management, then certain SaaS hosted products like proctoring, then AI automation engines. So we've done such kind of audits wherein the SaaS these are hosted on a SaaS environment, and these companies are required to report on the on the SaaS hosted application. Then there are IT services companies which are into into software development of software or QA, and these IT services companies also need to comply with the SOC 2 requirements. There are transaction processing companies, quality assurance, data centers. We have also audited Soc companies, that is the security operation centers for SOC 2 compliance. So these also need to comply with the SOC 2 requirements, for whom the applicability SOC is there. Next slide. So in case of SOC, there are two types. In case of SOC 1 and SOC 2, both have two types of audits. One is a type 1 audit, which is a test of design, and second is a type 2 audit, which is the test of effectiveness. So you will find it in both SOC 1 and SOC 2, wherein you have the test of design as well as test of effectiveness for the controls. Normally, the type 1 report does not have opinions. It is only report by an auditor that these are the controls which are implemented by an organization or followed by an organization. So that is a test of design. You will only see what are the design of controls and report to the organization that these are the test design controls which we are exercising. Then second type 2 audit is where you need to put the type 1 audit, that is the test of design, is conducted only in the first year of audit, not it is normally not repeated after that. In first year, when the organizations are not very sure whether the controls are working correctly or no, they go for a type 1 report. Type 2 report is when you have a stable or stable practicing of controls, and you need to report as to the controls are working correctly or no. So this is the report on which the auditors, the user entity auditors will rely on, and they will look forward for type 2 report rather than a type 1 report. So these are the bifurcations for both SOC 1 and SOC 2. That is type 1 and type 2 reports are applicable for both of the standards. Now, as I mentioned, under SOC 2, there are 5 trust service criteria which are related to security. That is, your information systems are protected against unauthorized access, disclosure of information, and damage to systems that could compromise the entity's ability to achieve objectives. Then there is availability, that is, access to your system is maintained. As we have as an IT auditor, we have already seen we already see the basic fundamental things like your CIA, that is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability is being maintained. So these in case of trust service criteria, we have similar pattern as well, wherein the security is the prime reporting part. Second is the availability of your systems, and third is the processing integrity, that is whether your processing is correctly, input and output processing is correct, and whether you have appropriate controls for access to data so that nobody can change the data from backend. Then then there is confidentiality part, wherein you have customer agreements for data retention and data disposal. So these are maintained under the confidentiality part. And last and the biggest part is the privacy part. Sometimes in audits, when we do audits, privacy is a very big topic, and it has some of the controls which are similar to the GDPR controls. So privacy would require as to how the data is collected, whether any consent is being obtained, how the data is retained, how it is disclosed and disposed of by the entity, and are there any processes for breach notification, or any process wherein the customer requires any modification to data or correction to data is being followed. So these are the controls which are being seen in the privacy part. Now, this is the service trust service criteria which is used earlier. Before 2017, the criteria was uh, prescribed by the AICP as to how the reporting will be conducted. One of the major changes which happened in 2017 was that the controls were mapped to the to COSO framework. That is, 5 COSO frameworks, 5 criterias of COSO framework. That is the control environment, communication and information, risk assessment, monitoring activities, and control activities. Now the report, when we start with the report, it's like we have 14 controls on the governance part. We call it this as the governance part. Sorry, 17 controls on the governance part, and there are 8 controls related to sub controls related to logical and physical access controls. These are the mostly technical controls related to there is a system authorization, there is a deactivation process. How do you how do you monitor your applications, and how do you monitor your logical access controls? How do you manage your operating system controls? Application, we have already mentioned. Database related controls. How is the network being monitored, or how is the network being networking being controlled? Then what are your controls related to your antivirus and your uh, anti malware controls? So these all things get controlled under the come in under the logical and physical access. We have done a lot of audits on the SaaS platforms, and believe me, when we say physical access controls, 2 years back, when we used to talk to we used to go for any audit, one of the key parts was we used to address was the physical access controls. But since the advent of COVID, uh, and offshore working, and a lot of other controls, I mean, a lot of controls being used for sorry, lot of controls being uh, are vanished as far as the physical access are concerned, because now the organizations don't even have their own servers. We've done audits in SaaS environment, wherein when we go to the audit and we realize, when we talk to them, do you have a server room? They say, what is a server? We don't know what a server means. We are on cloud. So the kind of growth, or the kind of systems which have changed, because now we need to adapt to a new world, wherein you probably won't have any single server, you won't have any routers, switches, or maybe even you don't even have a Windows server for the organization. Everything is hosted on cloud, right from their code repository to your bug trackings and your compilation tools, and obviously the hosting is on AWS or similar SaaS platforms. So these controls have to be rethink, and you need to adapt to report on the logical and physical access controls. Similarly, for system operations, that is the seventh part, is the system operations part, wherein how do you respond to a security incidents, or how do you what are your security incidents related activities. So those activities will cover things like VAPT, that is vulnerability assessment, penetration testing. Then how do you respond to a security incident? Suppose there is any attack or any untoward activity wherein your system goes down, how will you recover your systems? What is your process? How will you communicate with the people in the organization? These things would get covered under the system operations. Plus, what are your safeguards just in case the system goes down? Do you have any backup? Do you have any restoration process? Do you know whom to communicate? All these things get covered under the systems operations part. Some of the key activities which are observed under systems operations are related to vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. Have these gaps being closed? So these things all come under the systems operations part. Um, Eighth one is the change management. When I say change management, it is on two counts. One is your infrastructure change management. What have you done on what are the major changes in your organization for on the infrastructure front? Like you've implemented a new major tool for your development purpose, or you've changed your firewalls. You've changed from physical environment to a cloud environment. This is a major change. So what is the process being followed? Have you done any testing for that? And all these things would get covered under the infrastructure management part. Second part, which is covered under the change management, is with regards to your software development methodology. uh, Software development is one of the key activities which is tested under 8.1. And certain organizations may not have even controls for things like software, because they do not develop any software. I mean, in case of a BPO company, they do not have any software development process. So you might not be required to report on that. So you will only required to report on the infrastructure part. Ninth is the risk mitigation process, which is wherein you have strategies for third-party mitigations, third-party services being utilized, or outsourced services being utilized. How do you manage those risks, and how do you mitigate them? Uh, if you are using any outsourced vendors, what is the report you are obtaining? These things all come under the risk mitigation part. Then on the sorry, on the first five criteria we have not much discussed, but there are certain controls which are related to your. These are all sorry, from 6.1 to 9 up to 9. These are all technical controls and related to the management. The first five part is related to governance. So when we say governance, there is a control environment in place. So when we go for a control environment, what are the things we will look into in an organization? First is we will look at what are your information security related policies and procedures. Then, do you have any steering committee or a security committee or at least a monitoring committee which addresses your security issues? So we will first look into that control environment. Then, what are your controls related to, say, your HR part, human resource part, which are related to, say, whether you have non disclosure and confidentiality agreements. Then, do you have any security training programs wherein employees are trained as to what is the security control and what are the security issues you may face and how do you secure this environment? These are all covered under one point under the HR controls. Then there are certain controls related to uh, uh, which are subset of controls, not the main controls, but controls related to background verification, whether you have conducted a background verification of an employee. I remember one of the audits we did, we came across a case wherein there was a red mark on an employee, and we checked with the management what action was being taken, because the red mark meant there was something problematic with the employee. When we checked with the organization, we saw their documentation. It was like this employee had submitted a fake degree, and due to that, that red mark was there. So when we inquired with the management, they informed that this employee, that when they received this report, they went back to the employee and asked whether this is correct or there is some discrepancy. And once this employee received this communication, he absconded. He didn't go back to the company. So these things can also happen. In one of the companies, we observed that there was a red mark of for an employee who had a criminal background. So immediately when they received this red mark on the criminal background, he was removed. So that's the kind of controls which can be. That's the criteria which can happen in case of background verifications. Other than that, there are certain controls related to your to outsourced vendors or third party vendors, and these are also tested under the control environment. Then there is a communication and information as to criteria, wherein you report on what is the current state of the software or application, and what are the system boundaries through which they operate. Then what is your internal communication processes with your employees, like communicating your incidents management or security related issues. Then do they adequately have training to understand what is the security issue and how it will be reported. Second is how do you communicate with the external parties for your system availability, or suppose there is any downtime in the system or there is any security issues, how they will communicate with you. So these things are covered under the communication and information part. Next is the criteria for risk assessment. As in ISO, same is an applicable in SOC 2, wherein you need to have a risk assessment framework from an IT perspective, which will define all your risks. What are your what are the key risks that are affecting your organization? What are the values which are being attached in form of CIA, that is confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and what are the mitigating controls that you put in so that these risks are minimized and they are brought within the threshold limit. So these things are conducted under the risk assessment. We've seen a lot of risk assessments, and normally criteria under the risk assessment are not very well understood by the organizations. Uh, uh, an organization which is handling a lot of customer data has a key risk of data being leaked or improper customer management or improper user management. These are the key risks which they need to address, but most of the controls or the risks are addressed towards hardware and software failures or network failures, and rarely are these being assessed under these criteria. Next is a monitoring control. Monitoring now. So one thing about the SOC 2 is that when you read SOC 2, that is the Trust Service Criteria of 2020, you will find that it is more open to interpretations. There is no prescribed methodology in trust service criteria that you should test this thing in such a way. Now, when we say monitoring of controls, that it can mean how do you ensure that the controls are working correctly, and or is there any criteria wherein you can, which is currently being followed, so that there is a periodic reporting that the controls are working, or there is any discrepancy in working of controls. That's where the monitoring comes into picture. This monitoring can be in the form of an internal audit, or it can be in form of a CIS mapping, which is being exercised by an organization. It can also be in form of a vulnerability monitoring, because certain organizations may not require a service management or internal audit, and also, but for them monitoring the key system resources is would constitute a monitoring of controls. So we need to understand the organization and see what criteria is applicable to them, and based on that, we can report on the process on the monitoring controls. Next are the control activities. Now, when we say control activities, there are policies and procedures which define what processes need to be followed, how they need to be followed, who are the reporting, whom it should be reported to, whom it should be, what are the controls that need to be exercised, what are the steps which need to be taken. So the policies and the procedures are the guiding light for these control activities, which are reported under the trust service criteria. So these are the main part which is reported under the security. Now, when you start an audit, at the start of audit, you need to assess as to what are the 5 criteria which are applicable. It's not that you have to report on all the 5 criteria. It's this first part, that is the security part, is the common part, and that has to be reported by default in any report. So these 9 CC 1.1 to CC 9.2 are the mandatory criteria for reporting. And next is there are certain 4 more criteria, like the availability, confidentiality, processing integrity, and privacy. Now you need to pick and choose as to what is applicable to an organization. From our practical experience now, we see that availability, especially in the SaaS platform, is different from what is there in the traditional organizations. After the COVID, or after the pandemic, since the pandemic, availability criteria, if you see in the pandemic, all the companies adapted to this off-site work, or these off-site criteria easily, while a lot of other organizations struggled because they had this availability concept, or the PCB concept, wherein people can work remotely and do their work. So that's where the availability criteria comes into picture. Availability is availability of your systems, how you're monitoring them. Like in case of cloud environment, you may have CloudWatch on AWS, wherein it ensures that the network traffic is being monitored, any untoward activity is being reported. So these things would come under the availability. Then availability of backups, how you are maintaining the backup and how they can be restored. Then second would be the environmental controls. Given the state of the organizations now, especially the SaaS based companies, that is the which are offering cloud based software services, for them environmental controls like AC, fire, and also for your UPS. I think these criteria do not matter much, because now the companies are very clear. If my power is failed, there is a power failure, whatever, I will ask my employees to go home and work. That's as simple as that. And we do not host any physical servers, so we do not require any hi-fi UPS or power availability related controls. which will help in which will be there uh, for electricity supply. So these things also need to be considered. Next is the restoration part in availability. You've taken a backup, but have you performed any restoration or any disaster recovery test during the year? These are also tested under the availability part. Next part is the confidentiality. You have agreements with your customers as to what is the data that will be treated as confidential from a customer perspective. Have you mentioned these in the agreements? Have you taken your customer consent as to how this data will be maintained, how this will be disposed? So these are under the confidentiality part. Second part is the disposal part, wherein you specify to the customer that your data will be maintained for 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 7 years, as per the agreement, and this will be disposed after that period. So these things need to be mentioned under the confidentiality part. Next part is the processing integrity. Now, processing integrity is a term which needs to be analyzed carefully. When we say processing integrity, when we go to a BPO company for an audit, for an outsourcing company in an audit, uh, they will be processing the customer data. That is, they will be getting certain inputs. They will be doing the data entry, and then they will be giving the output to the customer company. So in this case, input might not be there. Input might be received only from the customers, or you might collect inputs from your customers, or from any website or something. So what are your controls related to input of data? What are your controls related to processing? How your people are managing the processing of data? And lastly, how the output is generated is correct and it is maintained is a part of processing integrity. uh, One of the examples in case of BPO companies can be that one person who does the processing is rechecked. His work is rechecked by another person in the organization for quality audit and for uh, quality audit and checking whether the correct criteria for processing is being completed. So these controls are all covered under the processing integrity part. Uh, Now these controls change when we are doing an audit for a SaaS company. Now, SaaS company might not be processing the data directly, but when they are building a product or a software product is being made, they need to ensure that there are certain input and output related controls. Say like what are the fields wherein you need to input the data, whether these have been tested under the quality assurance part, whether these comply with the certain requirements which the organization or the customers have requested for. If you are processing a data, so when you're processing the data or doing certain processing activities, how will you ensure that the output which is required to be delivered is delivered under the processing integrity part? So that these controls need to be tested, and most important control is with related to DBA. You have access to certain customer data, uh, though it may be in encrypted format or whatever format they are using. But if this criteria is being used, then uh, whether there are controls related to DBA, that is the database administrator, wherein he cannot modify the he cannot modify the data, or if there are any database activities being carried out from the backend, whether these activities are being uh, reported or are log is generated so that these can be reviewed by the organization. So these come under the processing integrity part. Next criteria is privacy. Uh, I mean, we've done many audits, and barely 10 to 20% of the cases, the privacy criteria would apply. What is the privacy criteria? It is a long list, and it is equivalent to your security related controls. I mean, there are nine areas which need to be tested under the in the part one, that is the security part. And in privacy also we have around more than 20 controls which need to be tested on the privacy part. Now, when is a privacy applicable? Suppose you're hosting a SaaS platform, SaaS product, and you're collecting certain private, your customers are collecting certain private information like your name, address, then your mobile number or your email IDs. So these things would be covered under the personal information part. And if you're storing these information, then the privacy criteria applies. Uh, there are certain controls which are required from a privacy perspective, like uh, getting the consent from the customers, then letting them know through privacy notice what are their rights as to deletions, what kind of information is being collected, like name, age, sex, your address or your email IDs, your phone numbers. These things are being collected, and what is the purpose and utility of this information being collected, where is this information sent to, and you might be using certain third party applications or third party APIs for processing this information. So these things need to be specified under the privacy notice. Then what are your user rights as to modification, deletion, or request any access to the data information. These also need to be clearly mentioned under your privacy notice or a privacy policy to your customers. Next is if there is any data breach, and how do you communicate this data breach to the regulators or the interested parties. There has to be process for this privacy part. Next is this is related to who is the contact person for the privacy related controls, and whom do you talk to in case you have any privacy related queries. So these things are covered under the privacy part. Um, some of our practical experience have been that in case of privacy, the controls are more. There are two parts in it. I mean, one is B2B part. Suppose you are processing the data wherein you do not have access to the end users directly, then the B2B part would come into picture. And this B2B part would be under that the consent and a lot of activities or a lot of things would be passed on to the user entity, wherein they need to they need to obtain customer consent and related controls, or request for any modification or deletion of any private information. So these things would get covered under the B2B part. But if you are operating B2C, that is from business to end customers, consumers directly, then a lot of controls would come under your part, like obtaining the consent, then any breach notification, or applying any breach notifications, then doing any modifications request or any deletion requests. These would all come under the privacy part. Having said that, some of the controls are similar to GDPR, but it's not as extensive as GDPR. You need to take a call as to whether your user entity service organization is providing B2B services or B2C services, and what kind of access is provided for privacy, what kind of a data is being stored. A lot of times people say, this criteria is not applicable to us. When we ask the reason, they say that the data is encrypted and we don't know what the customer data is. And that's where the catch is. Suppose a customer comes back and says, this privacy criteria is not applicable because we do not have an access to the customer information. Everything is encrypted and we cannot see the data and everything. And the next question which we ask our customer is that in case there is any problem with data or any customer request that this and this data is we are not able to see this, or there is any troubleshooting required for the data, what do you do? So they come back and say, what, we run the queries, extract the information, and then we can do this. So indirectly, a lot of organizations have, most of the organizations have access to the database, but they don't accept that at the first place. They say that everything is encrypted and we cannot see it. Another criteria which we can apply in case of privacy is with relates to customer support, wherein if there is any issue with the in any service, so the customer support team would be required to see this data, and if this data uh, is visible to the customer service team, what things they can see in the see in this data. uh, that's where we have to be very cautious on the privacy controls and what access is provided into the for the database. I'll move to the next slide. I think this is the longest we had. So how would an audit report look like? The audit report is normally divided into four parts. That is the independent auditor's report, wherein the auditor expresses his opinion. What are the starts with the scoping of the audit. What are the client responsibilities? What is auditor's responsibility? And finally, his opinion and what period did he test under the independent auditor's report. Second is the management assertion, wherein the management defines as to what are the boundaries of the assessment. Then what management assertion is, what is the period through which this for which the criteria is being tested. What are the system boundaries. In case of SOC, it's not necessary that the whole organization needs to be attested. In certain organizations, you might have a certain process or a product which is only being tested. So management needs to describe as to we have 5 services, but we are only testing for so and so service, which is covered under this report. Or there can be controls, or there can be reports in which only a specific client related process is being tested. They might have 10 different clients, but a specific client related only work is being tested. So that can also be done scoped under the SOC 2 report. Similarly, there is a part 3, which is the system description. The management provides as to what is the system description of controls, what is the product they are offering, what are the services they are using, like uh, say Azure platform or a AWS platform. On AWS platform, what services they are being utilized by the organization. Then what other services are being used, like uh, your outsource, what services are being outsourced, what is the organizational structure, what is the how your HR is functioning. Then related 5 criterias of governance, that is what is the control environment in the company, what are the meetings which are being held, or how is the monitoring being performed through by the top management. Then the risk assessment process, monitoring process, control activities, what are the system boundaries and what is the system flow diagram. These are also reported under the management description of controls. Other than that, how do you perform BAPT, logical access controls, user management, physical access controls, controls related to your DBA. These you have to give a detailed description of these controls and under this. Ideally, in a SOC report, what uh, what is being followed is that we have uh, you're required to report on the management description of controls. It's not that you can start with what is the system and how it will work. No, ideally it is under the management description of controls or the systems which are being followed by management, and you have to comment on that under the testing of results. I'll after the end after I end the presentation, I'll share one audit report which describes the how the audit report will look like. The audit reports normally run into at least 60-70 pages, which describe the management assertion, the system description of controls, and their testing results. All the 9 criteria per se, all the 5 trust service criteria, or whatever the applicable trust service criteria are there, we need to report on these, and these are the testing results which an auditor needs to report. Uh, the report would look different in a type 1, and report would definitely look different for a type 2. In type 1, when you do a type 1 audit, it will look only like uh, this is the criteria and management has applied this control, uh, uh, is exercising this control. But when you do a type 2 audit, there is a separate column for auditors, auditors reporting and what testing he has done, like inspection, observation, and uh, sampling, or inspection, or reperformance of controls. These things are all tested under, are reported under the part 4. So, what are the basic requirements, audit requirements, which come under the SOC 2? Earlier, when in couple of years back, when we started doing the SOC 2 audits, some of the customers used to push their customers used to push as to uh, we want a SOC 2 report, and it was mostly the US based organizations which requested for SOC 2 attestation. Uh, so one of our earlier customers, which was a BPO company, which when we asked them who is the customer or who is the end organization which requires the SOC 2 report, they said, we do not have any requirements for SOC 2 from our customers. We are doing it voluntarily, so that when our CEO visits the US and shows this SOC 2 report to our customers or our prospective customers, we can get a good business for based on the report. So people applied various criterias. Sometimes it is the customer push, which most of the time it is the customer push, which is which have which so because of which the SOC 2 reports were requested. In some criteria, or some of our customers, uh, we have seen now in recent years, not only the US based organizations, even Indian organizations have started asking for SOC 2 reports, which is a big change now. It's not only the US reports, but in the Indian organizations and the banks have also requested for SOC 2 reports from their customers, from their service providers. Same is the thing in Middle East. Middle East also, we have done audits in the Middle East, and SOC 2 reports have been requested by their authorities as well, especially in banks, for compliance purpose. So when we uh, the key question is, okay, you want to go for a SOC 2, what are the audit requirements, or what are the things which need to be in place uh, before we go for an audit. First and the primary thing is obviously the information security policies and procedures. Uh, there can be a lot of organizations which have complied with ISO 27001 have these policies and procedures ready, and they go for these policies. You can take the basis of these policies for information security. There can be a lot of policies which can be tailored to an organization, like information security, risk management, policies related to logical access controls, physical access controls, cloud management policies, then exception handling policies, and there can be so backup and restoration policies, disaster recovery policies, BCP policies, then policies related to system incidents response policy. These things all come under the policies and procedures for information security. Uh, then there are controls. Then you need to have a management description of controls, which contains details of your business, systems, processes, risk management. What is a control environment? And what are the control activities? So these things all get covered under the management description of controls. You need to have a risk assessment completed. This risk assessment will cover a lot of your what are the key risks associated with your with your risk criterias, and to your information systems, to your people, to your infrastructure. All these things get covered under the risk assessment. Uh, Normally, in first year, we recommend to have a gap assessment, wherein you assess what are the gaps in the organization, in the controls which are specified in the SOC and which are being exercised on the organization. You conduct a gap assessment and see what new controls will be required under this. You need to have an organizational chart. HR and admin related policies are very important, especially policies related to uh, what are employees' responsibility for security reporting, or how they comply with the security part. Uh, then we have certain procedures, NDA and confidentiality agreements, which needs to be there with internally with your employees as well as with the external agencies. In this cloud world, especially wherein you do not have an access to your end to your SaaS providers, you only can vouch that we agree is the criteria that we used. Then there are other controls, audit requirements, wherein you have monitoring controls related to audits, intrusion detection. Then there are certain organizations which require to compulsorily comply with SIM tools, the DLPs, that is data leak prevention, network monitoring. These come under the network monitoring part. In organizations which are developing softwares, the system development methodology, etc., would also come into picture. One of the key things which that is vulnerability assess VAPT, that is vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. Especially if you have publicly accessible web applications hosted on clouds, the VAPT would be very important. You need to have system architecture in place, network flow diagrams, BCP and DRP, incidents response and security response plans. These things all get covered under the security response plan. Third party audits. Uh, there are certain organizations which require third party audits as to for their vendor management and all. So these have you conducted such audits on your associated parties? And lastly, the important part is the privacy applicability. If you need to check whether the privacy part is applicable, and if applicable, do you have a policy or a notice in place, and whether these are being exercised. Okay, that brings me to the next part, which is normally when I have done a lot of presentations earlier, our presentation was around 70 to 75 minutes, and we had a lot of questions for the from the audience as to from a SOC perspective. So before that, I would like to first show as to how the audit report of a SOC would look like. This is a publicly available report. I'll just share that. This is So this is a publicly available report wherein uh, this is the reporting criteria as to what controls are being tested. Like in this case, only the security part was tested, so they have mentioned only the security part is being tested. This is the period. Normally, it is the calendar year which is reported, but organizations can pick and choose as to what is the period they would like to report, as to 6 months, 4 months, or even in certain cases, 3 months have also been reported for functioning of controls. Uh, as I mentioned, the four parts, that is the independent auditor's report, uh, management assertion, and this is the part three, which is the management description of controls, and the last part is the auditor's testing of report, auditor's test, that is the what are the tests being applied by the auditors. So this is the management providing as to what is the scope of assessment and what are the assertions being tested. This is the uh, auditor's report uh, describing as to what is covered, what are the criterias, or what are the five criterias out of which what are being covered, and what is the scope of service, what are the outsourced services being used, then what is the service organizer, what is the client's responsibilities, what is the auditor's responsibility, and obviously inherent limitations, opinion, restrictions of use. These are all being specified here. This is the overview of systems as to uh, the management provides this overview as to what are the components of system, hardware, infrastructure, softwares, what services are being utilized if you are using any softwares, then what is the hosting information, uh, you're using Git, what are the people, data you're using, then physical access information, logical access information. This is the management description of controls, wherein they provide what are the systems they are using, what are controls they have implemented. As I mentioned, this is the five governance criteria, that is controlled environment, how they've implemented it, what are the risk assessment processes they are following, what is their information communication process, what are the monitoring controls, uh, and what are the sub-service organization controls as to uh, uh, you're using services of AWS or any other uh, services. So these are being followed. Mentioned here. What are your sub-service organization controls? And these are all taken care here. Complementary user controls, that is what are the responsibilities of your customers, that is to whom you are providing the services, like their user management or uh, what are their contractual obligations, reporting of breach, these things all get covered in that way. And next part is the auditor's report, wherein you mention as to the first criteria, what are the controls being exercised, what are the tests you have applied, and any exceptions you have noted. These things all come under the reporting part. So as I mentioned, this report runs into 70 pages, 80 pages, 90 pages, depending on the organization, what controls they have. This is how the reporting would look like. And Nitinji, I'll share this report as well as my presentation with you. You can circulate it uh, with the interested candidates, people who want it. I'm now open to questions. I'm stop sharing my screen and would like to understand if you can type your questions, or you can also unmute.
Now I have unmuted everyone. So
Okay.
if anyone wants to ask a question can ask directly.
Yeah, Chandan, good evening. This is Prabhakaran.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question on that SOC 2.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, see, if I'm a service organization, okay, where I'm providing IT services to my customer,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I understand from you that type 1 report can go first year and the type 2 report, right? Is it
Mm-hmm.
compulsory to provide every year, or is there any frequency fixed for that type 2 report?
Normally, the type 2 is required. Report is required every year.
Okay, so can we do assessment on our own and submit, or is the third party auditor's involvement is
The third
mandatory?
party is required whenever law is required, because otherwise you need to do audit on your own.
So the third party attestations are required, compulsory required.
By law only.
Yeah, by law, or by the requirement of the SSA 18 criteria.
Yeah, exactly. Third party may wants that.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay. There are some area you shown right in the report, third party attestation. So that area only, or the complete report need to be prepared by third party auditors.
Yeah. Because when we go for an audit, we request for, we first understand the business of the client, we prepare the checklist as to what will be required. Now earlier Indian companies were more into IT services, providing services as to making the software and supporting those software services.
Yeah.
But now, in recent 5 to 7 years, the criterias or the situation has changed. Now we see a lot of product companies and SaaS companies which have hosted their products on the net on AWS or any cloud service providers, and these companies are required to comply with the or need to provide an attestation on their controls. So we have the majority of the work which comes now is on the SaaS platforms.
Any other question?
Yeah, Chandan, my question and next question also on the same line only. Suppose if I'm providing SaaS services to my customer using the sub SO like Amazon or Azure, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they'll be also providing SOC 2 report. Is that SOC 2 is fine to submit to my customer, or I have to add my elements also into that?
Okay, now in case of SaaS, even if you are using AWS infrastructure or cloud services, but the application which you have prepared or needs to be attested or needs to be checked for compliance with SOC 2. AWS will only provide you the platform or you might infrastructure for hosting your environment, but how do you provide access to the database, how you provide access to the application, whether you have listed the whitelisted those IPs, or there's a process to control the flow of work or flow of customers or the data, or who needs to access this platform. These are the controls which you need to exercise.
Okay.
So when I've shown the risk mitigation part, that is the 9.1 part, wherein it will ask, there will be controls wherein how do you assess the risks with related to vendors. So AWS being a vendor, you cannot submit AWS report to your customers saying that AWS is SOC 2 compliant, so I'm also SOC 2 compliant, because you are
Right.
hosting it. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Chandan. Those were my questions. Thanks for your wonderful session, Chandan.
Any other questions?
Uh,
I have one question.
Yeah.
I'm Swapna. Sir, if regarding processing integrity, if the client is not in the BPO criteria, then what documents we need to check for?
Okay. When in case of protecting processing integrity, if there is only a development activity, then we will test controls around as to whether they have a process as to when they develop a product, what controls they are following for input controls, or that is what data needs to be entered into the software, or how the processing has to be done from an input part, and how the output will be generated, whether this is being tested under the QA part or when the software is under development, and how this testing records are being maintained. This would be checked under the processing integrity.
Okay, thank you.
anyone has a question? Anybody can unmute themselves.
Hey, Chandran, Sunil here. Can you hear me?
आपका आवाज थोड़ा कम आ रहा है. Can you speak loudly?
Yeah, is it better?
Yeah, good, very good.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I wanted to check on the test of design. As you mentioned, it's only once applicability, right? So wanted to understand if the environment changes and the number of controls and all, if like how do we plan for that?
Okay, just in case the environmental changes are drastic, like say organization which was hosting on their own servers is now hosting things on say cloud. So this is a drastic change. So normally we recommend the clients to have a gap assessment in such case. Say in year 2, if the controls have changed significantly, we recommend to have a gap assessment, so that if there are any differences or controls which need to be placed are working correctly or no, so we can see them in the gap assessment report, and that can help client in mitigating those risks and those controls. Type 1, as I mentioned, is a test of design, and or when you give it to your user organizations, they don't rely on type 1, they only rely on type 2.
Yeah, got it. Thanks. Thanks, Chandan. Yeah.
Hello. Anyone has a question? So friends, before concluding, let us applaud on these things. It's a wonderful talk, really, and the depth of the subject was there. Really, we all enjoyed this thing, and all the PPT in these things will be available on blog. Those who email me, I will send it across to you. Somebody is asking a question. Chandan, it was a really very good. Really proud to be with you. I said there would be around 50 participants. There were around 50 participants. Some were coming and going. And in LinkedIn, there are 500 people have watched your video, right? Live on live.
Oh.
And we would put it on blog so that anybody can see it. And those who want the Isaka CP awards can email me mobile and send it to me. I'll send across to you directly, upload it to your CP. Please, Chandan, share your this also. And we need a speaker. We are continuously doing these seminars in Ahmedabad, and it is very difficult to get a faculty from Ahmedabad like the way you have experienced. Ahmedabad is not grown in information technology as it is grown in Pune, Bangalore, Mumbai. So we are scarce of good faculty, but still anyhow we are maintaining our tempo. I assure you that we would have another 50% growth this year also. And with this, really thank you very much, Mr. Chandan. And you are not in Ahmedabad, but I feel that you are in Ahmedabad. And whenever you are in Ahmedabad, you are most welcome to our Isaka chapter. Anyone, and we would be pleased to greet you. Memento, we are not giving right now, but when you come, it would be my pleasure to have a talk like this. With this, we are concluding. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All see you once again.
Thank you.